The NBA 2023 season is almost here, and I wanted to record a quick video here walking through how you can use SaberSim to dominate the NBA DFS lobby this year. My name's Jordan Chan, I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and to beat NBA DFS, you need three things. The first is a contest selection and bankroll management strategy that lets you weather the swings of variance and give yourself time to realize your profit. The second is a time-efficient lineup building strategy that combines projection, ownership, and correlation of every game, all while diversifying your pool and getting your lineups built in time to react to late-breaking news that tends to happen often in NBA. Finally, you need an efficient late swap strategy to keep up with the news that breaks throughout the slate and will change the projections and ownership of players playing in later games as the slate is moving through. Let's go ahead and dive into how we can actually do this here for this season. Now, just like any other DFS sport, the most important thing you can do for your NBA DFS process is make sure your contest selection and bankroll management principles are tight. Our recommendation is the DFS Profit Plan, which is a contest selection and bankroll management system that we developed by running thousands of simulations of a bankroll, playing different combinations of contests to see which one led to the most profit while minimizing risk. I will link another video in the description of this one that goes into that profit plan in detail, but the main things you need to keep in mind here is thinking about your contests as a portfolio. You want to select combinations of contests that work together to balance risk and profit side by side in your contest portfolio. The main 3 points you need to get down are to play 2.5% to 5% of your bankroll per slate max, to focus exclusively on GPP contests, and then to split what you're playing on any given slate 25% into single entry and 3 max and 75% into 20 and 150 max. If you follow those steps, you're on the right track, and that'll put you in a good position with your contest selection and bankroll management this year. But check out the DFS Profit Plan if you want more information. The big thing about contest selection and bankroll strategy is consistency. It's easy to start doing this when you first hear about it or at the start of a new season, but it's easy to fall into the trap of mixing up your contests or starting to overextend your bankroll, and that's really where people make mistakes. Sticking to this strategy throughout the entire season is the best way to maximize profit while minimizing risk with just contest selection and bankroll management alone. Now, before we get into building lineups here, I want to set the stage with a little bit of context about what NBA DFS is like if you're not familiar with it or if you're playing for the first time this year. NBA is fast. What I mean by fast is that news breaks often, it's going to break frequently throughout the slate, and it's very impactful to the overall strategy throughout the slate. Because games are often starting at a bunch of different times throughout the night, and the starting lineups for those teams only comes out about 15 to 30 minutes before the games actually start, and coupled with the fact that the NBA starts most of its games late, you're often going to be building and then late swapping and rebuilding your lineups multiple times throughout the night, and you're going to need to be able to do that effectively in 10 to 15 minute intervals. If your process takes longer than 10 to 15 minutes in NBA, it's probably just not a very good process, and there's things that you should trim down to make it more time efficient. The main reason why is because the news that breaks in NBA dramatically affects the slate overall. Everything in NBA when it comes to player upside comes down to minutes. There isn't a big single play that an NBA player can do, like hitting a home run or scoring a touchdown, where they get all of their fantasy points or an upside outcome or a ceiling outcome all in one play. Players need to be on the court. So if a starter is ruled out in a late 8 o'clock game, my time here, that's going to free up 36 minutes for other players on that team to suddenly soak up. All of their projections and all of their ceilings are going to rise considerably, and you need to rebuild your lineups to react to that news. But again, that news itself is probably only going to come out 15 to 30 minutes before the game starts if you're lucky. So reacting to that news in a time-efficient and quick way is really important. So in practice, when you sit down to build your first NBA lineups, what you want to do is make sure that you have the confirmed starting lineups for the teams starting in the next window of games that lock at that time. So for this December 21st slate from last year, there are 2 games that lock when the slate locks. I would want to make sure that all 4 of these teams have a confirmed starting lineup indicated with the green check mark that shows that we have that starting lineup. We've simulated for those starting lineups, and I would want to wait for that before I start building my lineups. That will typically happen 10 to 20 minutes before this actual lock. So that's about the time you have to do your process. Now, don't freak out. I'll give you a time efficient process here in just a second, but that's really what you're looking for before starting to build. Keep in mind that you need to set a line where you are building even if you don't have all the information. So maybe that's about the 10-minute mark. That's about what it is for me. If I don't have starting lineups with about 10 minutes left to build, I'm going to just go ahead and get my lineup started here, get something in, and react if I still have a little bit of time while I'm waiting for that last lineup to come in. But the main thing you should be looking for is green confirmed starting lineups for the teams that start at the next window before you start building. When it comes to actually building lineups quickly when you're under the gun on this time pressure, this is really where sims are really valuable. On a traditional optimizer, you have to program dozens of different rules to account for ownership and upside and correlation across all of the games. And as these starting lineups are coming out 10 or 15 minutes before lock, you would have to be updating all of those rules to get new lineups accounting for the new correlations between players on the same team and ownership and things like that. On SaberSim, every lineup you build is the best possible GPP lineup for a given way the slate could play out, which means you can let these sims be a foundation to you and make quick and efficient updates after we've built lineups here to dial in and fine tune. The process for building lineups on SaberSim is called build, review, revise. So we're going to start by just building lineups here. We're going to review the results and use the time that we have to revise and make some adjustments until we're happy with where we ended up. So let's talk about what that actually looks like. The first thing I'm going to do here is just make 2 small changes to projections to abide by the DraftKings rules. And let's say hypothetically it's 15 minutes before lock and we've got all the confirmed starting lineups here. And let's say I'm just building for a 20 max kind of contest here. So I'm going to leave the settings as the defaults for a 20 max, 10 to 50,000 entrants, something like the $1 20 max in the NBA lobby on DraftKings is normally that size. And we'll go ahead and build lineups. Again, what's happening behind the scenes here is we're going into this given slate using our updated simulations from each game on the slate with the confirmed starting lineups that we just got here and building the best possible GPP lineups for 5,000 different ways that the slate could play out. We've put a ton of work into the speed of the SaberSim builder. So you'll find that 5,000 lineups is generally going to build pretty quickly. I would say about 30 seconds to a minute or so is what you should expect to get a big pool of 5,000 different lineups that you can ultimately work with here, review, and revise. Now there's 2 other things we want to do to our build here to get it ready to be reviewed, revised, and entered into our contests. The first is we want to rank our lineups here. We want to identify the best possible 20 lineups in this case out of our pool of 5,000 here and select those and get those entered into our contests. We want the way we rank lineups or score lineups to take into account the projections, the upside, the correlations, and the ownership of a lineup here. And the best way to do that is with contest sims, which is going to take each lineup out of your pool of 5,000, simulate it as if it had been played into the contest you're playing on that slate 100,000 times, and see which lineups made the most money after all of those different simulations. I have a video that goes much deeper into contest sims that I will also link in the description of this one, but the quickest way to get set up with your contest sim is to go back to the settings menu, to go to contest sim settings, add a contest sim, and then the only other thing that you'll really want to do here is make sure that your number of sims is equal to 100,000. There are a lot of other settings here. This is the quickest way to get a working contest sim up and ready to roll on SaberSim here. But again, check out that other video in the description if you want to go a bit deeper in here. Once the contest sim settings are saved, we can run a contest sim, which will simulate every single lineup in our pool 100,000 times in the contest we're playing and see which ones performed best. Now, if you're not on the SaberSim Ultimate plan, that's totally fine. SaberScore, which is a custom algorithm we've built to score lineups, is a great proxy for raw ROI to determine what your lineups are the best ones to play in your contests. By default, your lineups will be scored by SaberScore, which you can see over here in the upper right. And if we pull up one of these SaberScores, we can see that it's taking into account the projection of a lineup, the upside of a lineup here, and also accounting for correlations there on the lineup percentiles, and the ownership of a lineup. These three big factors that we need to balance together here to identify the best lineups from our pool. So that's great. If you're not playing a bunch of contests above the $3 range on DraftKings and FanDuel, SaberScore will be really all you need, but the contest sims are a great way to get a more precise and accurate idea of what the best types of lineups are to play in that contest. I do want to quickly acknowledge that I'm doing this here on an old slate from last year where we don't have ownership loaded in, so that is obviously, we'll have ownership ready for the start of the season and all the slates coming up here. So right now, ownership isn't being accounted for because it's not available, but this should give you an idea of what you're doing here at this particular step. The last step we have here to get our build ready to be reviewed and revised is to diversify our portfolio. We don't want to necessarily be all in on the top ROI lineups or the top ROI plays. That can work out in our favor if all those plays go off, but a lot of times that's not what's going to happen. And rather than bricking slate after slate trying to nail that perfect core, we can diversify our pool, playing a balanced set of lineups that are different from one another that are all profitable in the contest. The way I like to do that is with min uniques here, which is going to say how many players must be different from one another when comparing any two lineups in your set. By default, this is going to be set at 1, which means all of your lineups are going to be unique from one another. But we can generally increase this to a pretty high number depending on the size of the slate here without going too deep into our pool and playing the worst lineups in our pool. A good heuristic here is to figure out what is the maximum number of min uniques you can set this to while still getting the number of lineups you need. So if I crank this all the way up to 8, you'll see this is going to go down to 3. That's not enough lineups. I need 20. You can find where that maximum value is here, and in this case, it's at 6. 6 is the maximum number of min uniques you can use here while still getting the number of lineups you want. What I like to do, the heuristic I use, is 1 less than the maximum. So in this case, it would be 5. And you'll see if you scroll down to the bottom, this is often going to give you a very nice mix of playing the top lineups from your pool. This is only lineup 171 out of 5,000 scored by SaberScore, but every lineup is at least 5 players different from one another. And if we scroll over to the player exposures, we'll see this still lets us get some good exposure to the best plays in this particular slate, but we're not heavily overexposed to any given play or anything like that here. So we have a nice balance of risk and upside with our lineup portfolio. 1 less than the maximum number of min uniques you can set is a very good rule of thumb to use for diversification this year. Now at this point, the build is ready to be reviewed and revised to make sure it lines up with your particular takes and opinions about the slate. Once you get in the habit of doing this quickly, the process of making sure the lineups are confirmed, building lineups, ranking or running your contest sim, and setting your min uniques really only takes a couple minutes, leaving you with some time to take any stands or make any adjustments you would like. I typically do most of this on the Players tab for NBA. It's a sport where correlations between players are a little bit lower. We're not as concerned about stacks, and a lot of times the way that I express my takes or opinions on the slate is in the form of individual players. The 3 columns that are most helpful here are the exposure column, which is the percentage of lineups that you have with that player in your lineup set, the pool exposure, which is how many lineups in your entire pool contain a particular player, and the leverage column, which is your current exposure minus the ownership projection, which shows you how much over or under the field you are on a particular player. The leverage column is probably the most important of these here. And right now we don't have ownership projections, so it's not going to work as well. But if we had ownership projections, let's say Moses Moody was projected to be 40% owned, this would say 25, which means we have 25% more exposure to Moses Moody than the field. The average lineup in our portfolio is more likely to succeed when Moses Moody goes off than the average lineup played in the contest, which means we're basically rooting for Moses Moody to have a good game. When you only have 5-10 minutes or so to make a few tweaks based on your opinions on the slate, the most important thing you can do is review the leverage column sorted highest to lowest and also lowest to highest. Highest to lowest is going to be the players that your lineups like more than the field. And lowest to highest, or most negative at the top here, is going to be your biggest fades. you should look into those players and make sure you agree with your stance on those players based on any other research you've done on the slate, individual gut feels, or just whatever your research process looks like. You can bring your exposure closer to the ownership projection to make you more neutral on a player. If you're not sure about either of your stands in either direction, adjusting a player's exposure here, for example, if we take Moses Moody down to 40% in our pool, will get you closer to the field here, finding the best lineups from your pool, ranked and sorted by the method you chose, while maintaining the diversification of your min uniques here. Now, you don't need to feel the need to have to take stance here. If you want to just roll with what the sims are saying, that's perfectly fine. And there's going to be some NBA slates where you won't have a strong lean or you won't have time to input these kinds of things. That's totally fine. But this is how you would make those adjustments if you do have strong opinions about the slate or your research has led you to wanting to get some exposure to a particular player or a team, or you want to take a particular stand or fade or something like that. Once you're happy with your lineups, and this looks good to me here, you can click Save to My Contest, which will prompt you to upload your entries file. We can quickly download our entries file for the contest that we've played on this particular slate, and we'll see if it actually lets me load it. Because this is such an old slate on DraftKings, I'm not able to actually load it here, but the final step is once your entries actually load here to just click Save to My Contests. That will enable this download icon to re-download your entries file, and you're ready to go to DraftKings to upload it. I'll link another video in the description of this one that does go over the process of filling your entries and saving it into the contest, so you can see that for an actual live slate. And again, we'll do other tutorial videos heading into NBA that walk through this for live slates next week, but I wanted to get this out ahead of time so people are ready here for the start of the season. So that gets us through the first two games that have locked on the slate. But again, NBA is the single most important late swap DFS sport. And that's because news is going to break throughout the slate often, and it's going to be very impactful to the strategy of the slate as it is breaking. So if I was playing this slate, I would want to be prepared and ready to late swap again for these 4 games locking at 5:30 my time, for another round at 6 here. It looks like 3 more games, and then again at 8 and 8:30. These starting lineups, we might have some of these 5:30 starting lineups here when the slate locks at 5, but we probably won't have all of them. You should generally be prepared to late swap for the start of every single game on the slate here. And if you're not going to be available to do that on any given slate, that's a slate you should just take off or just play the showdowns or the turbos or night slates for that slate. If you can't late swap an NBA slate, don't play it. You are leaving money on the table. Now, let's walk through the actual process here of doing the late swap. So let's say it's about 5:15, 5:20. The first thing we want to do here is check to make sure we have the green confirmed starting lineups for each of the teams in this window here. Again, if it gets to about 10 minutes before these games lock, it's really now or never time, and it's time to actually run that late swap and just update if you can after that. But ideally, we have the green confirmed starting lineup checks next to all 8 of these teams here. The next thing you absolutely want to check is the quick swap option up here in the upper left. You want to check to see if this is red. If it is red, it means you have a player in your entries file that has since been ruled out. And the most important thing is to click this here. I don't have any out players here, but if you did, you just want to swap all the out players to the best available player and get that new entries file uploaded to DraftKings. We're still going to late swap after that and rebuild our lineups accounting for that news, but the most important thing is to make sure we don't get stuck with a 0, and the quick swap will help take care of that. After that, we're ready to run our late swap build, which will take every lineup in your pool and build the best possible lineup around the players who have already locked into that lineup, accounting for the most recent up-to-date sims and all the new confirmed starting lineups. So to do that, we'll right-click the build up here at the top and click Late Swap, which will take us to a new swap build using all of the settings we've already made adjustments to, all of your exposures, everything from the old build will carry over here, but give you the ability to rebuild each of these lineups now, building the best possible new set of lineups with the updated news. From here, the process is basically the exact same as it would have been otherwise. You're going to go through the build, review, revise process. You'll build your lineups, which I can't do here in this video because I don't actually have an entries file for this old slate, but you'll build your lineups. You'll either run your contest sim or sort by Saber score. You'll diversify with min uniques, and then with any time remaining, you can review and revise to make adjustments to exposures based on leverage, based on the way that your opinions on the slate have stayed the same. If they've stayed the same, that's fine. You can leave them. But if any news has changed, that changes the way that you're thinking about the slate, you can make other changes there and then re-download and upload your entries file. You're repeating this process here for every set of games throughout the slate. So at 5:30, we're going through this process here, and then at 6, we have another 3 games here. We'll sign back on, check for the green check marks, check our quick swap here in the upper left, and then go through, run the late swap here, build, review, revise, and go on and so forth. Throughout the rest of this slate, we would have another game lock at 8 and a final game locking at 8:30. And again, because the starting lineups for each of these teams are only going to come out probably 15 to 30 minutes before the game starts, you should be expecting to complete this process here before the start of each game to play profitably and effectively in NBA. Now, I know this process can be maybe a little intimidating or a little daunting the first time you see it, but there's 2 things to keep in mind. The first is that the field isn't going to keep up with news this efficiently or effectively throughout the slate. So as you are going through this process and rebuilding your lineups to account for these new starting lineups, know that you are making your lineups more and more profitable. This is one of the easiest ways to get an edge in DFS, period, because it really just requires you to stay up to date, sign on at the right times and rebuild, and you're going to be getting more and more EV in each of your lineups as you're accounting for things based on different starting lineups or different minutes expectations that the average player in your contest just isn't going to do. And second, it takes a little while to explain this the first time and to get the steps down the first time you step through it, but in reality, the process of signing on, rerunning your swap, re-uploading your file while accounting for the min uniques and your sorting methods and things like that comes pretty naturally once you get the hang of it. So if you step through it a couple times, you'll get the hang of it pretty quickly. After a slate or 2, it'll come like second nature here to do this process quickly and give yourself some time to add your value or your takes or your opinions. And that's it. That's the foundation of what you need to be successful playing NBA DFS this season. The 3 steps are to keep your contest selection and bankroll management principles tight with the DFS profit plan, to have a time-efficient lineup building process using SaberSim simulations as a foundation to build lineups that are accounting for projection, ownership, and correlation, and to be ready to late swap to account for that breaking news as each slate is locking here. If you want a deeper dive into the DFS profit plan, contest sims, or the process of filling and uploading your entries into the DFS sites, I've linked those tutorials all in the description of this one. And if you're checking this out and you haven't tried out SaberSim before, we have a free 5-day trial on our site, SaberSim.com, so you can get signed up and check us out for the start of the NBA season. If you have any other questions, you can reach out in our Discord server or at support@SaberSim.com. And in the meantime, thank you for watching and good luck this NBA season.